kids ministry 33 years. I don't look that old. My wife, she's over here. She's a nurse. She's getting ready to go to work. She says that I should stop saying that because I am looking that old. But yeah, so 33 years ago, I started out and worked in local churches for 28 years. Several of the churches, but at a church in Las Vegas, believe it or not, there's churches in Vegas, some great churches, really. I saw a cartoon. It showed the rapture. It showed all these cities like in the Bible Belt with lots of people going up. And it went over to Vegas and one person went up. One person shot up. But yeah, so the church, Vegas is an interesting place to do ministry for sure. I'm sure you guys been to Vegas before, probably.
They're close to Vegas. Yeah. I think you guys are all Southern California, right? Pomona.
3 or 4 hours away.
Yeah. Shepherd Church. Yeah. So they're close. Vegas is a getaway, you know, they go over there and have some fun for the weekend.
Yeah. Vegas is like an every other weekend kind of thing for us. So yeah, we get you, Dale. Okay. We got you, bud.
Yeah. You must go to Circus if you have kids.
Yeah.
But yeah, so at the time, this was in the mid 2000s, Vegas was the fastest growing city in the country. There was like 72,000 people a year moving in. And you get outside the strip, it's all families. Of course, everything revolves around the strip. They either work there or they do something with a restaurant that's there or whatever, but it all revolves around the strip. But yeah, so we got there. We had about 8,000 people coming on weekends. The pastor he left there and went to Willow Creek. What's his name? I can't remember. Anyways, the pastor that had grown it to 8,000.
Right. Gene Apple.
That's it, Gene Apple.
And he's actually now back in Fullerton. I think he's at Fullerton Church, which is where Hope International University's at, where these students are from. Yeah, Gene Apple is at the church there in Fullerton. So
they brought in a new guy named Judd. You guys may have heard of Judd Wilhite. He's the pastor there. He was like in his early 30s when they called him, to be the pastor there. I think he was an associate in California somewhere, right? Southern California. But the church, the first year, the church went from 8,000 to 6,000. You had people that just needed to move on. But then after that, man, it just took off. And so we grew from 6,000 to 16,000 in 3 years. And everybody says, wow, that's awesome. But it was crazy. It was crazy. We're just trying to keep up with all of that. So we were there for several years. And I think they're up in the 20s now. They continue to grow and reach people. So felt like my time there was over. Went to Florida, South Florida, West Palm Beach area, church called Christ Fellowship, founded by Tom Mullins. John Maxwell's one of the teaching pastors there. He lives there in the area and teaches on a regular basis at the church when he's not traveling. But yeah, we had about 12,000 people and we had 3 campuses. So over the next 8 or 9 years, we started 6 more campuses and got up to 9. I think now they're at 12 or 13 campuses, but God just began to bless. We just began to grow. People say, how'd you grow like that? We look at each other and go, I don't know. It ain't us. We're not that good. But the church really did explode. And the cool thing was we grew by reaching unchurched people. It wasn't transfer growth, especially in Vegas. It wasn't transfer growth. It was just reaching lost people. So I was their children's pastor there for 9 years. And during that time, and even in Vegas, I traveled some, just like, Rick, like we were doing the group thing, traveled some, but you can only be gone for so many weekends, right? When you're at a church. So it just came to the point where I felt like God was saying, go ahead and step out in faith and start helping the Big C church. And so I did that. It was definitely an act of faith. Went from having a steady salary to living by faith. But so I've been doing that for the last 4 years. I do coaching, coach probably 20 to 30 children's pastors a year. Consulting. I go to I do a lot of stuff in local churches. I'll come in and be like a secret shopper for the weekend and then maybe train their volunteers and stuff. And then writing books. I have a new book that's at the printer. I'm really excited about it. It's called Fertile Soil, How to See Kids Follow Jesus for a Lifetime. And in that book, I break down why kids walk away from the faith and then what can we do? What can we put in the soil so that the soil will be fertile and they'll grow in their faith and serve Jesus for a lifetime. So that should be out as soon as the printer's done with it. Hopefully the next couple of weeks I'll have that out there.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, in fact, we're going to talk about that book momentarily, so we'll circle back around. One of the things you said was interesting to me, and we've talked about it a bit on our discussion boards in the class, and that is the area of parents and getting parents, drawing parents. And you mentioned that a lot of your growth, both at Central as well as in the Florida church, was due to unchurched people or people who are not did not really have that frame. And so I got to ask you, was it their kids that were attracted and brought their parents, or were their parents attracted and brought their kids? So, because I've seen it both ways, but
Yeah.
what was your experience?
I think it was both. I think it was both. I'll tell you, I don't know if I ever shared this with you or not, but here's a Vegas story that kind of sums up your ministry. Your church is usually a reflection of your culture, right? You're a reflection of the city. So we were growing by reaching lost people and church people, drug addicts, all that. But we had a lady in our church. Her neighbor was a stripper. She did bachelor in-house parties, and so the lady at our church got burdened for her and just started praying for her that she would come to church with her. This lady had no church. The stripper had no church background at all. She got her to come finally, and lo and behold, during the time to pray to receive Christ, this lady that was a stripper accepted Jesus into her life. And so she came back, started attending faithfully. And after a few weeks, she came up to one of our pastors, I think it was Kurt, after the service. Remember, this lady had no church background at all, knew nothing about the Bible. She came up to one of our pastors after the service, a few weeks after she got saved. And she said, I'm really excited. I'm growing in my faith. I'm using Christian music when I strip now. God honest truth. That's the God honest truth.
Yeah.
It took a while to coach her out of that. She's a single mom making $300,000 a year doing that.
Yeah.
It took a while to coach people out of that type situation.
So you put her on staff.
I don't know what song she used, but that's crazy.
Put her on the children's ministry staff where she makes a fraction of that. But
yeah, really.
Wow. Yeah, that's quite a story. I have had some, there's other friends of mine that are in the Vegas churches, and they talk about how they get like offerings. They get chips, poker chips, and all these chips that come in, and as far as their offerings go. So you kind of pray for good nights and on Saturday night in Vegas, I guess. But so you actually saw it both ways. You saw,
we redid our kids area, and we really took off after that.
Yeah,
we remodeled our kids area, but kids do bring their parents. I think I was reminded, Rick, one day in Scripture. How many times in Scripture did people come to Jesus because of their kid? They brought their kid to Jesus to be healed, and they ended up engaging with Jesus through that. So I think that's a picture of what happens today. Kids come, and their parents meet Jesus through the testimony of their kids.
Yeah, it is interesting. Well, Eric, Brianne, this is also about you, and we're kind of on this theme of parents and children's ministry for a moment. Do you have a comment or a question you want to ask along that line? Since we have been talking about it, feel free to unmute and ask away.
Yeah, I think for me, coming from a youth background, parent involvement is very difficult. It's like pulling teeth. And we do our best, to remind them how important their role is. But I saw such a drastic difference. I mean, literally, I took on this role fully at the beginning of the year, so very new to this. But for an example, we did an event and I sent a parent email out. And normally for youth, I do it almost as like a, hey, we just wanted to communicate with you. Here's what we're doing. No real response. Kids, I got like 100 parents in a day signed up, and I was like, what's going on here? So I guess my question would be, when looking at how eager they are and how hungry they are to get their kids involved, and then they all showed up to the event. We had a speaker for them during the kids event. They got to go to a separate place, and they were all there and stayed. What have you found, I guess, time-wise? How often would you suggest providing something for parents? Because I don't want to tire out the staff trying to have something, but at the same time, I want to make sure I keep them engaged and coming back. So
yeah. I usually tried to do once a quarter.
Okay.
That's kind of what I went by. We did some what we call family experiences. It's like a worship service for kids and parents together. We didn't do it on Sunday. North Point was kind of the church that started that years ago. We didn't do it on Sunday. We did it like on a Friday night. Now, I'll tell you where we saw a lot of fruit is parent-child dedication time. That's when you can catch those young parents that already don't have their kids already involved in sports and everything else that takes away from time being at church. But when I first got to Christ Fellowship, there was no parent-child dedication class. The first time I would meet the families was Sunday morning in the auditorium, at the front of the auditorium. And I began to listen to these parents, and man, they had, no, especially if you're reaching in church people, right? They had no idea what the class was about. I mean, what the dedication was about. And so I said, I got to start a class for this. So started to where they go through a class. And in that class, I would spend maybe 15 minutes talking about what the dedication is, and then 30 minutes talking about here's how to raise your kids to love Jesus. And we got a lot of fruit of that. We found if we could catch them young, that would bear some fruit as they raised their kids up to hopefully follow Jesus. But Rick, I was thinking, I read a report somewhere that said what percentage of parents are really active in their kids' school. And I think it was about 25% of parents are the ones that are really engaged in their child's education at school. And I wonder sometimes, does that transfer over into the church world? Is there a percentage of parents that are automatically going to engage? And then how can we get that percentage to be raised up, higher than 25%?
But it actually,
what do you think?
It mirrors the Pareto principle when you think about it.
Yeah,
where 20% do 80% of the work. 20% eat 80% of the food. It doesn't matter what it is, there's that 20%. And so that it's echoing that, which I think is interesting. My experience with parents is it's about 20% that are really engaged. And sometimes half of that are the parents that are the complainer parents too, the ones that you really, and that's why you got to be very careful, and you got to be on point with your own philosophy, why you're doing all this, because sometimes you can get some of those complainers, and they can be a problem. I actually say there are 3 types of people in church. There's winners, whiners, and wieners. All right. That's it. And 20% of your people are winners. I mean, they're champions. They'll be behind you. They're the type you want to have on your staff and stuff. Then you have 20% who are whiners. They'll whine about everything. They'll complain. They're the negative Nellies. But then you have that 60% in the middle. They're the wieners. They're the betweeners. And depending on whether or not they listen, they'll go one way or the other. But if you want them to go at least towards the winners, because they go towards the winners, you get a good movement that's positive and productive. Otherwise, leadership becomes a real drag real quick.
Yeah, for sure.
That's just been my experience.
I tell you, the take-home papers are great. The stuff we do on a weekly basis is awesome. If you do the analogy of a baseball game, I would see those as maybe a single or a double. But I came to understand that these milestones were opportunities to hit a grand slam. These are times when parents are like, okay, I need some help. Come help me. The child dedication, we got a new baby, help. When kids go into elementary school, do a milestone. And all these milestones have a class attached to it that kids and parents have to attend together, no drop-offs. And a Bible class as they enter elementary school. And then when they want to accept Christ, that's a time where parents are like, are they ready? Help. And then, baptism, and then the transition into middle school. Those are all times where parents will come to you and be like, help. And so I see it as a grand slam. If you can really engage those parents during those key times, you'll see a lot of fruit through that, a whole bunch of fruit through that.
That's a great point, is identifying those milestone events in the life of a parent that you can use as bridges or doorways into their lives. I like that. Well, you wrote another book. Yeah, Eric.
Well, I was wondering, Dr. Chromey and Dr. Hudson, when you think of staffing in kids ministry, what are some of the metrics that you use? What are some of the ways that you determine, man, here's how much staff we need? Especially with, this, I think what I'm hearing both of you say, and what I'm seeing to be true, that we got to help parents learn how to disciple their kids and how to continue faith conversations at home, continue praying at home, continue reading the word at home. With the church partnering with parents more, but then still the Sunday program and experience, how do you guys determine and what's the criterion for staffing?
Dale?
When I was at CF, we obviously had multi-sites and different size of campuses. How many should we have at this campus, that campus? And we worked together, and we felt like what we went by was one full-time staff member for every 125 to 150 kids. That's ideal. Can all churches afford to do that? Probably not. But if that was the model we came up with, was one full-time person for every 125 to 150 kids. You've also got the care of the volunteers on top of that, which is a big, huge deal. But that's kind of what we went by, and it seemed to work well. So if we had a campus that had, 50 kids, we'd have a part-time person there. Once they grew to 125-ish kids, then we would, make that person full-time. But that's kind of what we went by. I think I did a blog post about that last week. I've actually got that chart. If anybody's interested, you're welcome to see it. It tells when to hire who at different attendance levels, who should you hire first, second, third, and all that good stuff.
Oh, cool. Yeah. Can you drop that link somewhere? I'd love to read that.
I'll send it, Rick. I'll just send it to you. Is that okay?
Yeah, that'd be great. I'll pass that on. Yeah, as I was thinking about your question, Eric, I guess I was hearing it in a different way. Not so much about the professional staff for people, but more how many staff do we need for a class of 5-year-olds, for example, as opposed to a class of 12-year-olds or 10-year-olds. And first of all, when it comes to the professional staffing, I agree with you right there, Dale, that it's about every 125 to 150 is kind of the place where you want to have a full-time staff member over that crowd. But there's what we call span of control when it comes to leadership. Span of control is how many people you can rightfully manage underneath you. And that's actually 8. So, a staff member can really only manage 8. So if you've got 150 underneath you total, you've got to have other people spread out, and you've got to have departments, and you've got to have, breakdowns as far as other groups and stuff, maybe specific ministries. But here was my, my role, or my method when it came to staffing. First of all, I always wanted to have two adults in every classroom. So team teaching, and for also purposes of responsibility and just knowing, other eyes on the situations. You don't want to do it alone, especially in today's day and age. But my rule is basically this: look at their age, think their age. So if you've got 3-year-olds in a class, you want 1 staff member for every 3 3-year-olds.
Good.
If you've got 5-year-olds, you want 1 staff member or volunteer for every 5-year-olds. If you've got 10-year-olds, you've got 1 staff member or volunteer for every 10-year-olds. See how that works? So just think their age.
Love it.
That's how I kind of staff mine.
I never thought about that way. That's awesome.
Yeah.
It's
So,
good.
but ultimately, span of control is more from the upper level leadership. You can only cover so many people underneath you, and you've got to break it into departments and divisions. And Christian education used to do that. That was a foundational principle of Christian education administration back in the day. But well, I've got let's shift gears here a little bit, because we've got some Southern Californians here. I've actually they have tried, Hope International has tried many times to get me to move to Southern California, but I'm a Montana kid and I've got to see a mountain. And I'm sorry, Magic Mountain does not do it for me. It just does not. But you wrote a book.
We got Mount Baldy. We got Mount Baldy right here. Come on, man.
I'm Mount Baldy, but
I actually lived in Riverside for 4 years out there. My first ministry job was in Riverside.
Yeah. Oh, it's great. I gotta tell you, the only thing is now Boise, we're getting an In-N-Out burger, so there's no reason to move away. That was the only thing I was thinking. I might move to California for In-N-Out burgers, but now that we have one up here, we've got Chick-fil-A, we got In-N-Out, we've got Hobby Lobby, we got all the ones they're going to be in heaven anyway, so there's no reason to move. But you wrote a book, Dale, about the Disney way, children's ministry in the Disney way. Can you give us like a 5-minute unpacking of that, if you can do that? What's that book about? And let's talk about Disney for a moment. And because we actually had somebody, I don't know if it was in this class, maybe, yeah, it was in this class. It was a comment, I think, in the discussion board, if I recall correctly, that part of the problem with the mega church culture today is it's a kind of a Disney culture. We've kind of, I think the idea was we've become a Disney church. I think that's how this person put it. And I don't think it was either Eric and I don't know if it was any of you, but anyway, I found that interesting because I think I have some thoughts that maybe that's part of it, but I don't know if that's what you mean. What do you mean by the Disney way?
Who wrote that book? Disney has not been friendly to that book, especially with the stuff that's just happened. I'll be honest with you. I was at a conference this past week. I didn't take that book with me right now.
Okay.
Just because some of the stuff and to be honest, they're not a Christian company. There's a lot you learn from. They're not a Christian company, but I do believe Walt would not be very happy about some of the decisions that are being made that affect, our kids. Even it's supposed to be a family place. Um, but yeah, so I wrote that book with, actually the idea was from a friend of mine named Justin Smith, and he and I and Bruce, a guy named Bruce Berry, wrote the book together. And the idea was, what can we learn from Disney? What are some practical things that, because they are great at connecting with families. I mean, there's like what 70 million people walking out Disney Park, and the vast majority of those are kids and parents. And so, we always talk about that. Well, if I just had Disney's money, I could do that. Well, the truth is, Walt started out with nothing. It got so bad one time he went 2 weeks with just could survive on dog food. That's all he could afford to eat was dog food for 2 weeks. But because his vision and his passion and his ability to connect with families, you see, what's happened over the years. But so that book is just full of chapters like how to, build teams like Disney, how to get services like Disney, just some practical things like that that we pull out of that. But it's been a popular book. A lot of people, have read it, enjoyed it. But I do acknowledge that right now it's probably not the best scenario to make.
Yeah,
They'll blow over.
My point was not to focus on any perceived or real issues with their cultural perspectives, whatever that might be, and and definitely I'm more interested in just the practical, because it sounds to me like that's what this book is. It's take for example, if you go to Disneyland, how when you walk in, I've been to Disneyland one time in my life, believe it or not, just one time. And what I remember most about it was so clean. I don't remember, it was just clean everywhere. It was just clean. And I remember the characters that came out and engaged us. I remember, even waiting in line didn't seem to be such a chore, because there was something to do. And so there were a lot of things that I think would be very, some good parallels, some good takeaways for a children's ministry. And I just think it's good that someone wrote a book as far as some of those good comparisons, the Disney way. Yeah.
Like, so there's a lot of practical things like Walt had so many great principles and so many great quotes. Right before they opened Disneyland way back, before then, just a couple days before they opened it up, he had this quote. He said, "We can build the greatest buildings and rides and so forth." But he said, "It takes people to make the dream a reality." So there's lots of great stuff, principles in there that he taught, practical stuff. Like, when you have a group of kids together, I always would, like, let's say you have first people, I would always put the younger kids up front, and then, second, third, fourth back. Well, Walt said, don't do that. He said, put the older kids up front, because then the little kids will look up and see they're engaged and they'll engage.
Yeah.
So it's just practical things like that, and there's a debate about fun at church. When I think about fun at church, to me, that's the number one question that parents ask their kid, right? Did you have fun today? Now, what do they mean by that? Do they mean just, did you have a good time? No, what they're really saying is, they're saying, did they engage you today? Did they say anything that helped you? Did they connect with you? And so fun to me means, are we engaging? Are we connecting? It's not about how we teach, it's about what we teach. Because we are in bad shape, Rick, to be honest with you. I am, our biblical literacy is like, it makes me stay up and pray sometimes at night, just because I was at a church a couple weeks ago, and I was in a preschool room, and the teacher said, name one of the miracles. And here's they were kindergartners, 5-year-olds. Not one kid could name a miracle. And I was like, what are we doing? And I think we got to get back teaching doctrine and apologetics. I really, put some curriculum series out there about apologetics, because my fear is that this generation is biblically illiterate, and they're going to get to college and they're not going to have any answers, and they're going to walk away.
So
we didn't teach them.
Yeah, let's unpack this one for a moment, because we're talking about that. That's one of the discussion threads right now. In fact, we're dealing with curriculum a little bit this week. Why? I guess the question, I like to ask the big question, why, and maybe Eric and Brianne can help us out with this, because they're classically in what we call the millennial generation, which it's interesting to me. In the 80s and 90s, we put more money. We created the best resources. We had the best facilities and everything for the millennial generation. And yet it's the generation that's walking away from church. They literally graduated from high school and said, see you later, and except there's no later. They're just gone. Sayonara. They're out the door. And one of the reasons is, and I actually put this in one of my posts this week, is I think we taught in the 80s and 90s children's ministry in our programming and how we motivated. I look at how we motivated learning and such, is that we focused on conforming. We wanted these children to conform and perform. Those are the two things, perform and conform, but we never taught them how to be transformed. And I think that's where what we're seeing is that the children are growing up into their adolescence, and we just keep playing, all teen ministry is today. And Brianne, Eric, you're there, a lot of teen ministry is nothing more than trying to keep them interested again. And, it's junior church on steroids sometimes. And wow. So what? Thoughts? And then, if Brianne, by the way, Eric, if you got a comment or a question, there's a little reaction down at the bottom there. Just raise your hand. Let me know you're interested in saying something, and then we'll get you in there. Okay. But Dale, feedback on that one.
Yeah, man, for sure. I think it's what we've taught. I don't think we focused on apologetics, doctrine. And again, it's not about, that doesn't mean you sit them down and lecture them. We know that from our time with group. It needs to be, interactive and engaging, and there needs to be a time where they do get still and quiet and pray before the Lord. But again, it's not how we've taught. I think it's what we've taught. We haven't taught them what they need to know to make it the long haul. And it's all about engaging kids. We know that. It's about capturing their attention, and then presenting that, and make it interactive, make it hands-on, make it learner-based. Their kids are not going to sit there and listen to dialogue. They want monologue. And then another big huge thing is relationships. I mean, the cool buildings, and I've had all those cool buildings and stuff, it gets kids in the door. It'll get them in the door, but it won't keep them. It's relationships that keeps them, not the buildings and so forth. Are the buildings a tool? Ministries grow after we built new buildings. But the long-term growth, the sustaining growth, was because of relationships. Somebody was at church that knew their name. Someone was there at church that cared about them, and they would see them on Sunday. So I think that's part of the thing we've got to go back and emphasize is relationships. That's, discipleship happens through relationships. It does.
Well, and I like to think that fun is fundamental to learning. Yeah. You can't spell the word fundamental without word fun in it. And we know that from just educational psychology, that when you're enjoying something, when you're learning with and you're laughing, and your brain is literally lighting up, the neurons are flashing and connecting, and the synapses are popping, and you think more creatively, you think deeper. So to me, if you take fun out of education, you actually create worse. But Eric, I see the hand up. What do you want to say, add, comment, question?
Yeah, I loved what you said, Dr. Hudson, about the importance of relationships. And I think, in our context, in Pomona, we're a pretty middle to lower class community. And so, man, when we're in the middle of a building campaign right now, and gosh, we're struggling to get into the multiple millions of dollars, and our tithing base is really solid. It's not really the 20/80 as much. It's really just a good general donate in tithing base. But in terms of people being able to give way above and beyond, has been difficult. And so our budget in our youth ministry, for example, is pretty low. And it's always for me, it's always those juniors and seniors in high school who are it's hard to keep engaged. And we have just found, as we've doubled down on life groups and on communities and on these leaders, our leaders commit for 4 years. So they walk from freshman year all the way through senior year. And so that's the hardest part of my job, is finding an awesome leader who's ready to give 4 years of their life to this group of students. But when we do it, it keeps our juniors and seniors engaged. And then I think giving them ownership of their faith, like talking about apologetics, we had one of our student leaders. He basically, he ran one of our youth group nights and called it Christianity 101. And he just laid out, what is Christianity about? And so he did tons of research, all these things he shared, and 5 of his peers gave their lives to Christ.
Wow.
And I think that experience, that kid's name is Ryder. I think that experience of going, okay, I'm going to be upfront leading my peers. I got to really wrestle with some of this content and then the debriefing afterwards, the relationship with his leaders. I feel like that's where this next generation, Gen Z, Gen Robot, whatever it is, they're they want to own the experience. They don't want to be just consumers and bystanders. They want to, look at how many of them are creating YouTube channels and music. So many of my students have songs on Spotify, and it's not because they're rich. It's because they have a Google Chromebook that their school gave them. They created an account, and now they're uploading their content. And so I think giving them an opportunity to create in ways that, require them to wrestle with the Bible, to wrestle with some of these big ideas, that's been what I've seen to be fruitful. It's harder. It feels a lot harder and more time consuming, but I've seen it be fruitful.
That's good.
Great thoughts there. Well, Dale, this is a good segue into your new book about, I kind of gathered it's from this parable of the soils.
It is.
Yeah. So unpack that. We got about 20 minutes left. Tell us a little bit about your new book, and let's explore discipleship.
Yeah. So, it's kind of the premise of it is based on, they did a survey among the nuns, not Catholic nun, but N-O-N-E. I'm sure you guys know what the nuns are. What was sad was 78% of the nuns actually said they grew up in church.
Mm-hmm.
So they're doing this survey with people that have grown up in church but walked away, and 78% grew up in church. So there was three big reasons that they said they walked away. The first was disillusionment with the church. They thought the church had become too political, or hypocrites in the church, or financial things. Second reason, which was the biggest reason, was they said, we just don't believe anymore. We just don't believe anymore. And then the last reason was they said, we're just too busy. So I present those three areas. I present stuff we can put in the soil to counteract that. I try, just an example, you got to keep your eyes on talking about the church. You got to keep your eyes on Jesus. If you keep your eyes on people, you're going to get let down. People are going to be hypocrites. Hadn't it just been crazy this last couple of years? How many church leaders have just bombed out? I'm talking about people that have been in ministry for decades, have bombed out, and that's what they'll be remembered for now. But church leaders that walk the talk, and kind of one analogy I give, I think it's kind of funny, but think about Noah's Ark. I don't know if you thought about this, but you get that many animals on a boat, there had to have been a lot of poop. You think about elephants and rhinoceroses and cows. I don't know what they did with the poop, if they shoved it out the side of the boat or what they did, or just lived with it, but it was not a perfect place. It was probably pretty smelly. But the mission that the ark was on was perfect. And it was a perfect mission. It was worth giving their life to start over with mankind and redeem mankind and fulfill God's will. So in the church, there's poop. Sometimes it's yours, sometimes it's mine. People are not perfect. People make mistakes. You can't keep your eyes on people. But our mission to reach the world for Jesus is perfect. And that's something worth giving your life to. So that was one of the ingredients. There's about 30 ingredients total, but that was one, is to keep your eyes on the perfect person, Jesus, and keep your eyes on the perfect purpose, which is to redeem mankind. That's worth giving your life to. So there's just some practical things in there like that. I do go a lot into the I don't believe anymore and talk about that. I did a kids series, apologetic series called Pranksters, and we made it fun. And again, we pull pranks on people and recorded it and stuff. But the bottom line was, people are going to try to prank you. They're going to try to tell you that the Bible's not true, that Jesus was just a man, and so forth. And so in that curriculum, I actually went to some atheist websites where they had verses they said contradicted each other. It said that the Bible is not the word of God, and disproves it. Look at these errors. I actually took those verses to the kids and said, let's talk about these verses. So we went pretty deep on that and talked about those verses and proved why they were wrong, that the Bible is God's word and it's not an error. Like, just an example was, there's two in the Gospels. One Gospel says just Mary went to the tomb. Another Gospel says Mary, Martha, and Salome went to the tomb. So that was one of those things where the atheist said, okay, there's a contradiction. The Bible's not true. I showed the kids a little bit deeper in that verse. Mary says, and we cannot find him. So even though she didn't name the other two ladies, it was plural, there were other people with her. So we covered some things like that, because I want them to get the right answers now. Because if we don't give them the right answers, they're going to get to college and they're going to get to high school and they're going to get the wrong answers. And so we've got to be proactive and bring those things up. Brad Pitt's a great example. Brad grew up in church in a conservative, I think it was a Baptist church he grew up in. testimony in GQ magazine. He said, when I was about 13, 14, I started having questions. He said, I would ask these questions, but nobody would give me any answers. And of course, now he says, I think he's an agnostic at least, if not an atheist. But just an example of how we got to, teach the kids apologetics, teach them why we believe what we believe.
There are a lot of stories. Obviously, a lot of the millennial kids, even some of the Gen Z kids, they're definitely growing up. They're not understanding. And that's why I kind of wanted to come back to that parable of the soils, because to me, that's a great story for understanding the different types of people. Because that, the shallow soil, the thorny soil, the hard soil, so can you walk through that? And how does that relate to discipleship? I mean, how does this work at all?
Yeah, it's interesting you said that it relates, because I think those three reasons that people said they walked away line up with what we see in the soil.
Okay.
I don't believe anymore. That was the shallow soil, right? I saw a stat somewhere that said that 24% of Gen Z kids say our teaching is too shallow. That's the kids saying that. So that parallels with the shallow soil. And then you've got the thorns that choked out the seed. Sports choked out the seed. Traveling sports teams where kids are gone 7 or 8 weeks at a time choked out the seed. Too busy choked out the seed. And then of course you've got, what was the third one? You got the shallow soil.
Hard soil.
What is it?
The hard soil.
Yeah, the hard soil. So those three line up with those things, and I think they are a good indication, of why people do walk away. But I think the soil, I talk about in the book this. Well, actually, it's interesting. The soil I talk about is in the Ukraine. Ukraine has got some of the most fertile soil in the world. I forget all the ingredients that are naturally there. And so I just believe that if we can create this fertile soil and put these and I name like 30 ingredients we want to put in, that kids have a greater chance to grow up to love Jesus. I will say this has made me kind of also think about the Proverbs we've all quoted: train up a child in the way he should go and he'll not depart from it. I don't think that's a promise. I think it's a principle, because I personally don't believe that God's going to violate a kid's free will. Right. And if you're Calvinist, that's fine too. You might see it a different way, but for me, I feel like that they have to they're going to make a choice, and God's not going to force them on that. They got to make their own decision. But I believe if we make the soil fertile enough, there's a really big chance they're going to grow up to love Jesus. But is it 100% for sure? No, because I think people have free wills for that. So that was my part about the soil there, and just what to put in it. Like one important thing I think is application. Are we okay? I saw you looking back at your clock.
Yeah. Unfortunately, my clock is behind me, and I have to keep looking back because I don't want to exhaust your time. And I appreciate you being here. But go ahead, finish your thoughts.
One last thing about application. I think application is so important. Information and application. If you just do all information, you're going to have a lot of facts. But the Bible talks about that. The works is what there's something about serving that activates your faith and really gets you on fire. That's another thing that we know, that the kids that serve, they turn out to love Jesus and follow him. So it's really important to get kids to serve. We actually, our high school, just about your youth ministry, our high school pastor actually decided to stop going to camp where it was all about the kids. And they spent a week out in a poor community in our area there, just helping paint houses, help paint the public schools, do backyard Bible clubs. And we wondered, and there was nothing fun, quote, fun about it. They slept on cots in a local school, and at night they had a worship service. So the first year we were kind of like, is anybody going to want to come? But you know what? It blew up. There was a waiting list to get in. And so many kids were impacted because of the serving element there, instead of just going off and having fun. It's all about, it's about serving. And a lot of those kids have grown up to follow Jesus. But the other thing I was going to talk about just real quickly is application is really, really important. Here's an example. The curriculum that I created, I have a year and a half worth of curriculum that goes from salvation all the way to spiritual leadership. But we talked about serving. So the kids came in the room for one of the lessons, and I put candy at every seat. There was candy. And as the kids came in, I told them, I said, this is your candy. You can have it. We talked about giving. And at the end of the class time, I said, it's your candy, the key. But there's a very poor community over here. Those kids, they're children of immigrants, and they don't have hardly any kind of candy or stuff like that. If you leave the candy, we'll take it and give it to them this week. So you got two choices. You can keep the candy, it's yours, or leave it there. And you could feel the tension in the room, but that's what I wanted. I wanted them to feel that tension, and the vast majority left the candy in their seed, but some took it. That's okay. But just that kind of application to where you really let them, and we learn from group that emotion is one of the glues to learning, just that they feel that application right there on the spot, and emotionally it impacts them. So just doing things like that to make it come alive and real, I think is really, really helpful.
So where do you see children's ministry going in the next 10 years? Let's not look deep, but next 10 years, where's it going? And we're in this post-COVID culture. Everything kind of changed with COVID.
Yeah.
So what do you think?
I did an article about the future of kids ministry. I'm trying to remember what I put in it. COVID has definitely affected a lot of churches. Families they're still trying to get some families to come back. So I think that's part of it. And just as far as culture, we're definitely in a battle culturally. I won't go any farther than that, but I think we've also got to, in the future, we've got to make sure we're raising gospel kids, not just good kids. And I was just burdened about, curriculum. We should teach kids character, but I think that we should teach not just for them to be good, but to be gospel kids, to be sold out for Jesus and see what it means to follow him. That it's not about them, it's about following Jesus and living for him. It's a big thing. So I would say that's a couple of things. So hopefully curriculum will be more focused on being a gospel kid, not just a good kid. Frequency of attendance has been a big deal and still continues to be. Like the last church I was at, our average family was there once every 4 or 5 weeks. And there's a core that's there every week, but the average family was there once every 4 or 5 weeks. So how do we change that in the future? We've got to do something. And online stuff is okay, but I'm not a huge fan of online stuff for kids. I think they need to be able to sit across from somebody that can look them in the eyes and talk to them and minister to them and pray for their needs and so forth. So I think that's going to be a big part of it. You think about the AI stuff. I don't know, will we one day not need to recruit as many volunteers because we have robot volunteers?
Possible, depending on what the task is. Yeah.
But
those are not going to be cheap.
No, those are the big things I would say. That's kind of vague, but things are changing so rapidly.
Well, I do think that the COVID moment exposed all of the issues in the church in general. The ones that we were kind of covering up pretty well with our busyness and such. For a better part of a year, and again, depending on where you're at, down there in California, it was definitely more than up here in Idaho. I mean, Idaho, we were shut down for roughly 3 weeks. After that, they said, if you want to meet as a church, go ahead. They encouraged us. I run a small group, and so small groups were the first ones. We were meeting within 3 weeks. Our group was. So we did Zoom as well. In fact, we continue to do Zoom. We met last night and we had 4 or 5 on Zoom from different states that come in. So we never gave up the Zoom. They're still part of our group. But I do think that there's going to be there's been a big shift, and what it exposed more than anything is in the stage culture of our church, which has really been something that has emerged in the last 25 years. It's really been that was the mega church 1980s contribution. The model shifted at that point towards more of a stage culture. It used to be when I was a kid, I as a child, I would go up and I would read the scripture before the preacher came to preach. That was one of the jobs of all the 6th graders. When you got to be 6th grade, you read the scripture. So whatever passage the preacher was preaching on, you did that. We passed communion, we passed offering. We were involved as a preschooler. I was doing the communion cups back when we had glass communion cups. And so by the time I hit junior high and high school, I was leading songs in junior high for my church. That's unheard of. And what happened with the mega culture or the mega church culture is it really created this stage moment where it put the people out there to passively watch while a few people got the spotlight. And of course, there's a lot that could be said about that, but that made it very easy then to put a film on it and to be able to broadcast it. And the churches that already had that in place, they had the film in place, and they had the cameras in place. They navigated the COVID moment fairly easy as far as broadcasting it. What they didn't realize is the people came to church not to watch a screen, but to find a friend. And we've forgotten that. We've forgotten the community. You could go to a lot of churches, and I'm not just talking big churches, I'm talking small churches. Go in, sit down, watch, listen, sing, hear the message, get up and walk out, and not have one human being speak to you, touch you in any way, shake your hand, communicate, interact, whatever. And that's not church. And I think we've gotten away from the whole idea of what church is supposed to be. And children's ministry is the greatest place to share all that. Yeah. How do we get to know what church is? We learn it by sharing. We learn it by telling others. We learn about, being friends. Kindergartners, they don't have these cliques yet. You throw a bunch of kindergartners in a room, there's no cliques. That doesn't develop till fourth grade. I don't know. I'll give you the last thought. We've got to probably start summing this up. Are there any questions, Eric, Brianne? You've been kind of along for the ride, but any thoughts you want to add to this conversation?
I think for me, I'm encouraged. I think coming from I grew up in a bigger church, and then I have worked at a bigger church my entire adult life, and so it's kind of all I've known. And COVID, I think you said it really beautifully. Like, it exposed all of the weaknesses. But I'm so grateful for it. Like, I'm so grateful that I was so program driven for a long time, and it's just what I inherited. It's all I knew. And we've been able to really back up and say, okay, what are we doing relationally? How do we know these kids? Because at the end of the day, that's the church that Jesus is going to fulfill his mission through, is the people. So, Dr. Hudson, you said it, I think, really beautifully also, with gospel-centered kids, not good kids, and that's been what I'm just beating the drum of with all of our volunteers. And if you have any good curriculum that really shines that, please let me know, because we kind of struggle with that. Everything's so principle driven. I think right now we're having to chop up everything. I'm just every week, hey, how do we let a kid know that they belong in God's kingdom? That God went to great lengths to show them that they are loved and that they're accepted. And that's the place from which everything else changes, So if you have anything, I know we're going to talk a lot about curriculum probably in this class and all of that, but it's been a little bit of a struggle for us to find, because I'm also very, I like aesthetics. I like things to be very modern and whatever. Yeah. I'm having a hard time finding very current modern curriculum that is gospel centered.
You can go to buildingkidmen.com and it's there.
Okay.
There's samples of everything on there.
Okay.
Buildingkidmen.com.
Well, it's long as buildingchildrensministry.com, but Building Kidmen works as well.
Okay. I'll check it out.
So yeah.
Eric?
Yeah, Dr. Hudson, I really loved what you talked. I agree, Brianne, about gospel-centered kids. And I think one of the things that COVID exposed for us as a church is we're a multi-ethnic church that wasn't prepared to have racial reconciliation conversations. And so me and a team of about 9 of us, pretty diverse group of people, we started a gospel and race group. And we had about 74 participants. And it was all the things. I mean, it was crazy and powerful and good and really hard. And people were angry and all kinds of stuff. And so we went back to the drawing board. And right now we're in the middle of our second version of it. And we've got 65 participants. We're reading book together. We're having race conversations, listening, building empathy. And so I think, but at the center of it, it's the gospel. It's and I think, I don't know if this is what you were kind of getting at, Brianne, but I think for our generation of leaders, we've got to figure out how do we wrestle with some of these cultural things, but through the lens of the gospel. And I mean, thankfully, racism is one of those things that as Christians, we can just go to the Bible. I mean, the Bible, the entire New Testament is dealing with, it would have been so much easier for Paul to start a Jewish church and a Gentile church on opposite sides of the street. but he saw fit that the cross of Christ and his resurrection actually builds a bridge, and Jews and Gentiles could worship together. And so I think that's one of those things that I'm wrestling with in students, and figuring out how it spills over into kids and into adults is, how do you think gospel, how do you have a gospel-centered worldview, even as a kid, that then gives you lenses and a way of looking at things in the world? But then particularly, how do you interact with people? You know, I mean, COVID just created so much division in terms of, like, what I see Fox and CNN do is they're just yelling louder. They're just trying to get louder and louder than everyone else. And so how do we as gospel-centered people have better and different conversations around any of these kind of topics, and not say, okay, I go to church and I have these church beliefs, but now when it comes to politics, or when it comes to race, or when it comes to abortion, or when it comes to, this is where I really the lens I see it through is my politics, or whatever. How do we help the gospel? How do we help people see everything through the lens of the gospel? That's just a mess of thoughts, but we're something when it comes to race that we're wrestling with as a church right now.
Yeah. Dale, why don't you want to give a last thought there, and we'll call it a day here. It's good stuff. Thank you, Eric.
Yeah, that is so good.
Are you having an earthquake? What's going on over there?
No, that's you guys out there have the earthquakes. I did ride through with you when I lived out there. I think the issue is not, we have to keep our focus on the main thing. The issue is not if you have 50 people in your church, or 500 or 5,000. That's not the number that we ought to really, be burdened about. The number we got to focus on is the number of people in our communities that don't know Jesus. The issue is not how many people are inside our church. The issue is we're surrounded by thousands and thousands and millions in some cases of people that don't know Jesus. So that's what we got to keep our focus on as a church, is reaching people and discipling them, not how many are in the house right now. I think that's where Jesus' heart is, and that's where our heart should be.
Yeah. Well, when I first, my first book was called Youth Ministry in Small Churches. And back then I developed a principle right from the very beginning in the small churches I was working at. And it applies to all churches of all size. Don't count the people, just make the people count.
That's good.
Don't count them, just make them count. That's going to be everything. And by the way, Eric, through COVID, I was dealing a lot with the different conversations, and you're right. We've created these echo chambers, as I like to call them, where we kind of get into them, and I think it's because they're secure for us. We know that when we get inside that echo chamber, that we're going to hear stuff that we agree with, and we're safe and we're comfortable. We don't have anybody yelling at us and such. But I developed this acronym because I love acronyms. It helps me remember stuff, and I call it Talking Tech. And I'll just leave it with this thought with you. I won't unpack it entirely, but the idea is that there are 4 types of communications that we have between people today. The T is where we just have to translate. Sometimes it's a cultural thing. You live in a different world than I live in, and I've got to help translate what's going on here, because you say this and I say the same thing and they mean totally different things. So sometimes we have to translate, and understanding that type of communication is very important. The E is elaborate. Sometimes we need to go deeper. We need to give a historical foundation or a philosophical foundation. We have to just go deeper and elaborate on that truth. The C is collaborate. Sometimes what we do is we just need to get together and share our gifts, share our thoughts, share our ideas. We need to collaborate together. And then the last type is what I call habituate. And basically this is communication where it's kind of a line in the sand type of communication. We have policies and procedures in our children's ministries that we need to communicate, and we don't fudge these. We don't change these. If you don't apply or comply with them, then you cannot be part of our team. So we have to habituate, create a habit of people to come into that conversation. So there it's about just telling them, this is the way it is. If you don't like it, then we're not for you. Okay. So there's a habituation. So knowing which one of those to deal with, whether you're translating or elaborating or habituating or collaborating, is key. The bottom line is, in the end, it's all about respect. We've got to respect. each other. And that's the thing that I think the church, we've got to learn, we've got to relearn it as we go out into culture, it's just show the respect that's out there. Well, Dale, it's been a great time. It's been one. Have you guys learned some good stuff today? This has been fun. I've enjoyed it.
I've learned some good stuff today as well.
Yeah. So, and that's why we do this, these Zooms. So thank you, everybody. I hope you have a great weekend. Hope it's blessed. And we'll